Welcome to SDSF Live. Please let us know where you're logging on from. And one good thing that happened to you this week, I'll start. I got my second COVID vaccine shot and I have no side effects yet. So thankfully I could do this show with y'all. This evening, we're going to be talking about transplant, not from a medical perspective. We had a show already with the doctors that we will link below. This evening, we're going to talk about transplant from a caretaker and patient perspective. I'm Nicole from Houston, Texas. I can't wait to introduce you all to our friend Savannah. She's an SDS mom and SDSF board member. She's going to be co-hosting with me tonight. Michelle's going to be helping with the comments. Savannah, welcome to your first show. Can you tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Hi, yes. Like Nicole said, I'm Savannah Lillywhite, and I currently live in Beaumont, Texas. My husband, Brett, and I have 3 boys. Ethan, he's our super sibling, and he just turned 12. And then we had Andrew in 2012, and he only lived for 3.5 months. He was our first SDS warrior. And when he was born, that's when SDS came into our life like a wrecking ball. He was the first patient in the hospital there in New Mexico. And when we found out that we were pregnant with Lincoln, who was born almost 5 years later to the day, we decided to move so that we could get him better medical care. And a reminder, moving on from me, to our audience, this show is brought to you by the Shwachman-Diamond Syndrome Foundation, who supports patients and families throughout the world. And please remember not to ask any personal questions on here. It is going to be posted on the SDSF website and YouTube, and subtitles are added, and you can use the translation tool after it's uploaded.
This show by far was our hardest to plan. We took a lot of thought into this show. We just wanted to make sure we got this show right. We wanted to make sure we got all the perspectives and wanted to make sure all the voices were heard. This evening, we will have Savannah co-hosting, who has gone through transplant with Lincoln. We will have 2 more guests who have gone through transplant for different reasons. And we'll have a patient and have invited guests to comment below.
So before we introduce our guests, I want to tell our viewers that we have invited Tera and Erica to give their perspectives as well in the comments. So look for their valuable answers as well below. Now on screen with us, we have Jess, Jodie, and Harrison. Hi, Jess. Hey, Jodie and Harrison.
Hi,
Hello.
How are you?
And Jess, let's start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this. My husband and I live in southwestern part of North Dakota. We have 3 daughters. Everly and Coven are twins, and they're 5 years old. They do not have SDS. And then our daughter Henley is going to be 4 in May. We went to transplant. Sorry about my light situation here. We went to transplant 3 years ago, just before Henley was a year old, because all 3 of her bloodlines were failing. She required frequent blood transfusions, and she had neutropenia that would not stabilize and decreasing platelets. And so her doctors suggested that we go to transplant, and that was in October of that year. And by February, we had a donor, and we were at transplant in April.
Thank you. Jodie and Harrison, how lucky are we get a twofer in your square? Can you introduce yourself?
I'm Jodie. I'm the mom.
Hi, I'm Harrison. I'm the patient.
And we actually are a family with 2 Shwachman-Diamond boys. Both Harrison and Truman were born with Shwachman-Diamond. Harrison wasn't diagnosed till he was 6 months old. And that was right when they had discovered the chromosomal defect for it. I mean, literally that month. And then his brother was born 13.5 months later with it as well. So that was a long time ago. They're 18 and 17 years old now. And Truman was the first to have transplant in 2018. He developed AML quite quickly. A bone marrow biopsy 6 weeks prior did not show it. So it took a hold of him pretty quickly. And then, so he went to transplant in September 2018. He came home from San Francisco in December, and 2 weeks later, we met with the doctors on January 2nd to find a donor for Harrison. So they had transplants 10 months apart.
Wow. Thank you all for sharing your intros. The reason we're having this show, it's one of the most common questions from the SCS support page. It's something a good amount of us think about, and hopefully learning a little more from this perspective will help ease anxieties and help others feel more prepared. I say this every show, but we truly have a ton to get through. So let's dive right in. What were your first steps you took once you found out about transplant? Let's start with you, Savannah.
So I forgot to mention that Lincoln is 3, and he is 15 months post-transplant, and he headed to transplant because, like Henley, all 3 bloodlines were failing. And so when we were told after, the GCSF injections, the red blood cell infusions, the platelet infusions that he was regularly getting, that he needed to go to transplant, the first thing I did was cry. And so the second was we started messaging parents who had been to transplant, so we could get some hope that we weren't going to head towards another heartache. And we reached out to the specialists. In addition to talking to our local team, we talked with Dr. Shimamura and later talked with Dr. Myers and Dr. Burrows in Seattle. We contacted insurance quickly to find out what they cover in state and out of state, and went over our current bills that we had and what additional bills we would have and how much Brett could possibly take off of work and all of those things. While also finally with that, we looked into FMLA, the Family Leave Act, that allows you to legally take up to 12 weeks from your job in a situation like that. And looked into, since I'm a teacher, the sick leave bank, which I blessedly was able to qualify for so that I wasn't docked my pay while using my FMLA days. So that's kind of the first major things that we did when we heard we had to go to transplant.
Thank you, Savannah. Same question for you, Jess.
Sorry, I was on mute there. I think the first thing we did when they started to talk about a timeline for Henley going to transplant was we contacted another care facility, which happened to be Boston. Excuse me, we wanted to know that like 2 teams of doctors were on the same page and that they felt the same way, that yes, transplant was our best option and our next option. We had some very challenging conversations about all the possibilities that we were going to face, including the idea that we might lose Henley during that process. That was hard, but it seemed to help us cope through it and prepared us for that possibility when we would explore the idea, what if this or what if that happened? How would we react? What will we do? That made us feel a little bit more empowered. We made plans for childcare for our twins. They were just 2 years old at the time. We explored housing, spoke to Kyle's work about FMLA as well and how long he could be gone. I really felt like I needed Kyle and the twins to be as close to Henley and I as possible during transplant until she was at least initially discharged. And then we also started working on the idea of a budget and what we imagined that it might cost to live 10 hours from home for basically 4 or 5 months.
Wow. Thank you, Jess. Same question for Jodie and Harrison.
Well, we thought we were doing pretty good to have them get to 14 and 15 without even getting close to transplant. But our worlds were rocked the day after Mother's Day in 2018, and Truman was air flighted out of Madeira to San Francisco, out here in California, and he had an aggressive form of AML that showed up just 6 weeks after he had a bone marrow biopsy. Both of them had had their biopsies done, and yeah, they their cells were low, of course, but not where it was just a total surprise. So we were forced into it. right? So we had to get the leukemia into remission first, and before he could even be a candidate for transplant. So he got his bone marrow transplant in September of 2018. And then just as he was coming home from San Francisco, which is 3 hours away, we made an appointment on January 2nd to start looking for a donor for Harrison. His counts were also in that zone. So we figured we just went through it. We might as well do it right now. I know that sounds a little cavalier, but your thinking is different when you're going through that challenge.
Wow. Thank you all for sharing. Next question, where did you transplant and why? And what questions did you ask to make your decision? Let's start with Jodie and Harrison.
Well, the boys have been treated at UCSF their entire lives. So Harrison was diagnosed there at 6 months of age. And so we've had a deep connection with that amazing hospital, amazing doctors in the hematology area there. So, that's where whenever they got sick, we went there. So they knew the boys very well. So there wasn't really a question about it for Truman once we got the leukemia into remission. But the great thing about San Francisco is that they were in close contact with Boston, and they're a very collaborative group. So that really helped. And then of course, for Harrison, we already knew the team. So
yeah. Thank you both. Same question for Jess.
We chose to continue care and go to transplant at University of Minnesota Masonic Children's Hospital. They had been the ones that diagnosed Henley and had provided us great care, like Jodie's talking about. You build some relationships with those doctors and that care team. They were also physically the closest transplant center to us, although that was still 10 hours from our house. I have some family in Minnesota, so we thought a lot about the idea of a support system for Kyle and I and for our twins. We had gone to Boston and toured their facility, and we tried really hard to imagine ourselves in both places and where we would be most comfortable, basically. We asked both places about the different chemo protocols that they would use. We asked a lot of questions about what it would look like to live in their hospital. We already kind of knew what it was like in Minnesota because I'd spent so much time there already living in their hospital. Mm-hmm. It was a really challenging, difficult decision because we felt a lot of pressure that we'd be making the right choice for Henley, and worried that if something went wrong, we chose one place and something went wrong, would we regret that we were in that place and hadn't gone to the other? We also felt like not everybody's opinion of where we should go aligned with what we wanted to do, but ultimately we decided to be in Minnesota. SDS is a really special genetic disease because it's so complex, and that is part of the reason that there are specialists in Ohio and in Boston. But I think that as we explored it, we learned that there's a lot of complex genetic diseases, and that there are protocols to handle all of those, and we just felt comfortable in Minnesota, so that's where we went to.
Thank you, Jess. Savannah, I was lucky that I was one of the main people you were talking to during your early transplant journey. I felt useless because our family had not gone to transplant before, but I guess because we both were going to the same home hospital, I was able to give you some perspective in that arena. Can you tell us how you made your decision?
First of all, you were not useless. You definitely were a big help to me. Second, like Jess talked about, when you go to transplant, there are a lot of ideas of where you should go. No matter what you choose, there's going to be someone who does not agree with what you do. But at the end of the day, you do your research. If you believe in it, you pray, you go with your gut. For us, as I said, when we first learned we were going to have to go to transplant, we got with our local team, and we live an hour and a half away from a great transplant center. But for us, we also wanted to get that second opinion. So we reached out to Dr. Shimamura in Boston, and we arranged an in-person consult during the SDS Registry Family Day. which also had some presentations on bone marrow transplants in STS patients, and talked about how delicate they can be and how that need for that reduced intensity approach for STS patients, which is generally, I think, well known for, across the board. But I was being told in my local center again, which is great. I love them and appreciate all that they've done for us. But I was hearing some different things about Lincoln could possibly need full intensity because he had a high cellularity. Well, when I talked with Dr. Shimamura and later with Dr. Myers, they were like, no, like that, no. And so, that just raised, it's already, you're nervous, you're going to transplant. So if you hear something that the experts with transplants is saying that doesn't sound right, it doesn't help calm those nerves. So while we were at transplant, at Family Day, I talked with Dr. Myers and we set up a phone consult. And after we talked with her, I knew we had to go there. We had to check it out. And during this time, we also were emailing Dr. Burroughs in Seattle because they were the only ones that had treosulfan, which a lot of us have heard the buzz, treosulfan, which I know Dr. Shimamura has talked a lot about its ability to have full intensity with reduced toxicity. Well, so I wanted to talk with Dr. Myers about, and one of the questions I asked her was, is this something Lincoln has to have? Because since Boston didn't have a set protocol yet, they did the Cincinnati method of the CAMPAS, fludarabine and methylene that I think is common, but they didn't have a set thing. They were waiting for that trial for treosulfan. And Dr. Myers told me that no, she felt that Lincoln didn't have to have that he could have as much success with that Cincinnati model that is their bread and butter. And they had the highest kind of rate of successful SDS transplant. And just sitting down with her and the fact that all the questions I asked, I felt for the first time, I felt some peace. I felt some confidence that I hadn't felt. And I know some of that stems from, PTSD with Andrew. We were in a center that they had no clue about SDS in general. And so to be with someone that I knew SDS in and out, had people as a team that knew SDS in and out, and was very comforting for me. And one of the questions I asked them, in addition to how long will we have to stay close by, which is 100 days, and what their center had that no one else had, and how they dealt with some of the typical major complications that could come up. And one of the things that they have that it can't go out of the state of Ohio that was shared with them from DC is something called virus-specific T cells, or VSTS. And so they take some blood from the donor and they make super soldiers basically to help treat viruses like TMA, which can hurt the kidneys and amongst other things, without causing as much organ damage as some typical antiviral medications. And we never ended up needing those. We never used them, which is funny because it's one of the reasons why we chose to go there, because it was something that no one else had. But again, at the end of the day, our insurance was willing to work with us to go there. There's always so many different factors, and there's different relations you have with different doctors. And for us, that's just the one that felt right. And so in the end, we went to Cincinnati. Next question. I forget sometimes I'm one of the co-hosts.
She's doing double duty today.
My first show in Get the Nerves Under Control. But moving on, I'm going to start with Jess and ask, how did you manage siblings and jobs during transplant?
Well, I was already an at-home mom because we had found out we were pregnant with Henley while the twins were not even a year old yet. So we had 3 tiny kids. Excuse me. We ended up hiring a full-time nanny to help with the twins, and Kyle took FMLA from work. Really, each day that Henley and I were in the hospital at Transplant was almost like a work day for him, because the day looked like the nanny would show up at the apartment about 8 in the morning. He would pack up food for me and bring me clean laundry and any of my other requests that I had, bring that to the hospital, and usually be there in time for doctor rounds every day. That wasn't always the case on a weekend. On weekends, sometimes one of my parents would help, or a brother would help, or Kyle just wouldn't come to the hospital that day. But for us, and because Henley couldn't be in the hospital room alone, and she was so young at the time, and I mean, we went, feels like months where she couldn't even be set down at all. I was really dependent on another caregiver to come in just so I could do something simple like take a shower, because I couldn't shower in her room. I had to go down the hall and shower. And so I just totally, I looked forward every day to him walking through the door to be there and help me. And I think that if a person is going to transplant, they definitely need someone in that role to help take care of the caregiver in a sense. So.
Thank you. And the same for, let's see, make sure I didn't lose my spot. I was doing so good. And Jodie, let's go over to you and Harrison.
Can you repeat the question?
I'm sorry. Yes. How did you manage jobs and siblings during your journeys?
Oh, we didn't get to plan, because of Truman and the cancer. It was not a good time in our life, to be honest with you. Things were not good. We were already living separate. So things were very intense as a mom and dad. But we were thrown into that situation, and we traded out. That, I guess that's one of the benefits of being, 3 hours from the hospital. But if you know anything about California and traffic to San Francisco, it's 3 or 4 hours. You never know. So we traded out. Both of we both work. I'm an administrator at a community college in charge of distance education. You can imagine what the last year has been like too. So they were very helpful and allowed me to work remotely, which I continued to do the entire time. I took very little time off. And then Chris, their dad, also worked remotely as much as he could, but we'd trade out every 3 or 4 days. And that was really hard. We don't have any family. I don't have any siblings, no family. His family's not involved. So it was really just the 2 of us, which is the way it's been for 18 years. So we really just had to step it up. I have one good friend, her name's Jodie too. And she stepped in as parent. She stayed at the house, helped with Harrison. Harrison had to become very independent, though, riding his bike to school. We had just gotten a new puppy, too, 2 weeks prior to Truman having leukemia. So my friend even slept with my puppy. And, so we just, it was survival mode. It was really survival mode. And I look back and I don't know how we did it. And then I don't know how we did it again 10 months later. And we're still under very regular care still.
I couldn't fathom doing it twice.
No.
I couldn't. I have such mad respect for y'all.
It's it is, you look back and it's, you think that doing it again is like, oh, we just did this, but their mantra at UCSF is that every child is different. And so they did not have a cocktail set. They design it for the child. The fact that Truman had leukemia, though, was really, really scary. I mean, within, 3 days, it was 72% of his marrow. It just was super aggressive, and we were very scared. So we had hematologists and oncologists on his team. Our original doctor is kind of an interesting story. Our original doctor who diagnosed Harrison at 6 months, when that was really amazing. The best man in his wedding was our oncologist. And that was really special. He had moved on. He's really a big doctor researcher in Georgia. But we had that personal connection, and they tried experimental chemo on Truman, and then the traditional cocktails for both of them after. But every child is different. Every child reacts differently. And I could go into more details about that, but we anticipated that Truman would have a harder time with his counts coming back, but really it's been Harrison. Without the leukemia, who's had his cells are still not waking up entirely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jodie. I realize I skipped over myself, so I'm going to answer the question for me too on how we manage jobs and siblings. So siblings first, one of the hardest parts for transplant for us was to be apart from Ethan. He'd already been apart from us when Andrew was alive most of that time. So the mom guilt was hardcore, but in the end, we took into consideration his personality and his needs. He's in 5th grade. We didn't feel like we could have him with us and give him what he needed. He'd get scraps of our attention, our energy. We couldn't stay on top of his schooling. So we sent him to have an adventure with his aunt and uncle, who are like his second parents in New Mexico, and his cousins, who are his best friends. They're all like the same age. And he got to do a play. He got to go on hikes instead of constantly worrying about what was going on with Lincoln. And we FaceTimed with him every day, and we had him come up for Christmas. And then once Lincoln was stable, then Brett and I took turns switching off being with Ethan in Texas or Lincoln in Ohio. So that's how we tried to balance, y'all know how hard it is to try to give your all to all your kids in a situation like that. As far as jobs, like I said, I had the FMLA and the sick leave bank, which was a huge blessing. It allowed me to be with Lincoln for 12 weeks of it. And from amazing help support that we got, Brett was able to be with us for a majority of that time. And then there was a period of time, like a month here, a month there, that Brett and I were on our own, but it was when, Lincoln was out of the woods and it was at a stable, good place. So that's my part, Nicole.
Thank you. We're going to break for comments and questions. We actually have 2 questions for Harrison, and I'm just so excited that this show specifically can amplify patient voices. So thank you, Harrison, for joining us again. So we actually have another adult patient that has gone through transplant as well that has asked you a couple of questions. His first question is, do you have graft-versus-host of the gut?
No, I don't think I had graft versus host. No.
That's great. That's awesome. His other question is, do you have EPI problems taking meds?
No, I wouldn't say so.
What does that say?
What is EPI?
Pancreatic insufficiency. Do you take like Creon or
Oh,
Zentab
yeah.
or? Okay.
Yes, I do take
But
Creon.
you still have those issues. Okay.
Yeah, because transplant doesn't. Transplant only treats, one part of Schwachman-Diamond.
Right.
So they both still take pancreatic enzymes.
So a good portion of, going back to our GI show, a good portion of the patients may outgrow the pancreatic insufficiency by school age. So some patients it goes on, some patients it goes away for a while and then may come back in adulthood. So check out our GI show for that information. So next question, if you had to travel for transplant, where did you stay and how did you make that decision? Savannah, let's start with you.
So we made that decision based on, like I said, that Cincinnati had one of the top experts. It was within driving distance, 16 hours away from us, so we could switch off. The cost of living was lower there in Boston as well. And this kind of gets, and we were able to stay at an apartment complex near to the hospital. And that would let us out of a 6-month lease with a letter from the hospital whenever we were ready to go home. And I know I'm kind of jumping ahead. It's kind of one of the questions, but it's actually the next question, so it's perfect timing. So we stayed there as opposed to the Ronald McDonald House because, and the Ronald McDonald House is great. I've lived at one with Andrew, and when it was, it was just me there. But the one where we went to in Cincinnati, it was going under a lot of construction, and I had a friend there that had very good experiences. And because insurance was willing to help us out and we were able to raise enough, we were able to have that option to have an apartment. And we followed the advice I'd been given from Jess and other friends who'd been in transplant on how much it helped them to be able to get away and to be able to heal in their own space and to be able to keep Lincoln away from other people and their germs more, having more control over that. But again, like places like Ronald McDonald House are amazing, and that is an option. I wouldn't want anyone to be scared away from going there because of that. And I know they've made updates and things like that. So I hope that answers that question, but that's why.
If I could chime in there, that was one of the first things, when we were following Truman over in the helicopter, he was over in the helicopter and we were driving there. So frantically, parking was $30 a day at UCSF, and we had no idea how we were going to manage any of that. San Francisco is just grossly expensive. We never did stay at Ronald McDonald House. We never left either of them one night ever. One of us was always there. And that we insisted on. But there was and there is an amazing home there called Family House. There's one in Oakland and one in San Francisco. And I do not know how we could have gone through this without them. They gave us a room, free parking. There would be hot meals. We actually had a room there while we stayed in the hospital too, that we were able to keep our things there and go get a fresh shower and a communal kitchen and relate and talk to other people who were going through, other challenging things with their children. And they put us up both times. And I just, again, there's just no way we could have gotten through that with the financial burden without them.
That's amazing.
Thank you for sharing. Jess, same question for you.
Well, we were big planners, so we had it all planned out exactly how it was going to go. It was going to be perfect, and it wasn't. It ended up being chaos. So we also had planned to be at Ronald McDonald House. We moved in, and it was not a fit for our family for a variety of reasons. And so in the middle of workup week for transplant, which is really intense, and a snowstorm in Minnesota, we moved out of Ronald McDonald House, and we were able to find an apartment that was only a furnished apartment that was a mile from the hospital. It was expensive, but at that point in our journey, we just needed something really clean and safe for our family, and it was perfect. We were just so happy and comfortable there. And so the twins had their own bedroom. Kyle and I had our own room. It worked out really well for us. And it is what I would recommend to somebody else, I guess. Like having our own space was huge. So.
Yes. And like Michelle mentioned in the comments, because we had an apartment close by, we were able to make meals and bring them to the hospital with us. So that was really nice. But moving on, Jodie and Harrison, what was your most must-have item that you bought or purchased to bring to transplant? What helped get y'all through it?
Let's see. Well, first off, it's good to have your own pillow, a good, nice,
That's a
comfortable
good
pillow.
one. Yeah.
Because the hospital pillows, I don't think are that great. But I think I also brought maybe I don't think it was allowed, but maybe I wish I could have brought like my favorite stuffed animal or something like that.
Yeah.
But all in all, just a pillow and my family.
Yeah, your own pillow and slippers were really important for me. And a wagon to carry everything, especially food and drinks, because they can't have any food brought in except for packaged food for a long time. And so we had a little red wagon that we would take up and down. But we have this idea of giving care packages, but COVID hit. And our most valuable item was a little tiny whisk. A little tiny whisk. That's going to be in our Truman's Loving Care TLC packages because, they can't swallow pills. And some of them, they insist. And some of them are, what do you call it? Hydrophobic. So they don't mix with liquid. And so we had this little whisk and we chop, 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 and stir it up really quick. And then they down the hatch. And every nurse that came in was like, that's such a great idea. I'm like, yeah, we've done this one time before. So I have a package of 20 of them that I'm going to give to people, these little metal whisks. It was ideal.
That's awesome.
Thank you. Thank you both. Jess, what was your must-have items?
It's so hard to think of like one thing, but I'm huge on the idea of stuff that brings you comfort. So like exploring that thought process before you go, what's going to make me feel comfortable and peaceful. So a sound machine was one of those things that helped a lot in the hospital. And music was huge for me. Like I had a playlist of songs I shared with Savannah that I could listen to that would settle me down. So if I was getting upset or if Henley was getting upset, boom, I put that music on every night. I listened to that music and it was like my consistent thing that helped me so much. I also had a calendar that was on the wall. I'm saying more than one thing. And finally, if you have an infant that you're going to transplant with, like my huge thing was an inflatable swimming pool that gave Henley a safe place to play and be on the floor. We put like gym mats underneath it and then we blew it up and the doctors thought it was like the smartest thing ever.
I love that.
And I felt comfortable because she could crawl around, but not be on the floor, which gave me the heebie-jeebies. So
I love that. I wish we'd had the room for that. Our rooms weren't as big. So that's cool.
yeah.
I love that we got a little mix of like what was critical for like an older patient or with that question.
Yeah.
Emotionally, what advice do you have to get through? Savannah, let's start with you.
Emotionally, so sorry, I accidentally didn't answer that last question about must-have items.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's gonna go with this one.
Okay.
So, emotionally, breathe and be patient with yourself, and take time for yourself when you can. So our must-have items, a lot of them, if not most, came from Jess's list that's in the comments. For Brett and me, it was headphones, noise-canceling headphones, so that when I was listening to music on my own, whether it was the inspirational music from Jess or my angry music, whatever mood I was in or what I needed, or watching Netflix with Brett when Lincoln was sleeping to just get an escape to get out of the room. That was it for us. And for Lincoln, it was the covered stroller so that before he started chemo and after he engrafted, he could get out of the room and go on a walk and be safe because he wouldn't keep a mask on his face. And his comfort blankets and his Mickey Mouse. That's what he was learning songs to watch. Back to dealing with it emotionally. Talking with someone outside of the hospital when you had the energy to talk to anyone would help. And the biggest thing for me was talking with a psychologist. So at Cincinnati, They have one for the patients and they have one for the parents. And I was able to meet with a psychologist once a week in the building on a floor below for her to help me work through the PTSD of having lost a child before and now in a life-threatening situation, and to be able to try and separate their stories to deal just with the trauma of being in transplant in general.
Thank you, Savannah. Same question for Jodie and Harrison. What advice would you give to other families to get you through emotionally?
Again, I think we were very fortunate, and I would go so far as to recommend San Francisco because of Family House. As I said, we didn't have any family, and I literally mean that. No, nobody. Since the kids had grown up with Schwachman Diamond, we didn't have a lot of close friends either because, we couldn't do the normal things that other kids and play dates and all of that stuff for their lives. So it's kind of the four of us. But Family House was that emotional support. We were there with other families that were going through things, but the people who were working there, you could break down if you needed to, or they would help you celebrate when you had something. They never made you feel guilty. And you'd have volunteers come in that would make a hot meal, which was something that we did not have. I mean, somebody came in one time and made a ham dinner with fresh salad and tomatoes, and I was just crying because and they served a little wine too. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing. So it's those little things. But it's hard. It's hard. It's hard. And to go 2 years that way, there's faith too, that you have to have, if that's not your cup of tea. Ours was strengthened through it, confirmed, strengthened through it.
Yeah. Thank you both. Same question for you, Jess.
Like I talked earlier about the idea of music, that helped me a lot. Most of the songs on that list were Christian songs that just made me trust God through the process. I journaled a lot, mostly like on Facebook, trying to keep people kind of up to date. We live in a small community that had a lot of prayer warriors for us.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I needed to keep them up to date. And I also felt very much like I could feel the prayers. Like if I shared what was going on for the day or that I needed something, I felt better because I knew that people were praying and helping me through that day. So that really helped. I had a couple friends that like every morning I'd wake up and my phone, I'd have a text message about some inspiring phrase that would keep me going through the day. I started putting Post-it notes all over the room with pictures all over the room that gave me visual things to look at all the time and try to stay positive because there were some very, very hard days.
Yeah.
Wow. Did you have something to add, Savannah?
Oh, yes, sorry. Before we break for comments, I just wanted to add, along with what Jess said, Michelle Grinnell, when she was admitted with Nathan across the hall from me, right before Lincoln got his cells, she started drawing pictures with how far, what day it was into transplant with inspirational quotes. And it really went along with what Jess said. It lifted our spirits, and once she left, I took it on. And I'm not artistic at all, but I'd look up pictures and something to go with it, and it covered the wall. And the nurses would come in and they'd be like excited to see what was next, on the wall. And I have a huge thanks to Jess and to Michelle for helping me get that idea of put up positivity, surround myself with that as much as possible.
Michelle's awesome with her
Yeah.
ideas. This was such a powerful show. I want to thank you all so much for joining us. I know this is a show that a lot of families are going to reference when they come to this point in their SDS journey and ready to go to transplant. I know it's a show that we could reference a lot on our support page of go back to this show, and this these stories and journeys will help other people. If you everyone watching at home, if you've been through a transplant yourself, please add your own advice and answers into the comments section. Even if you're not watching live, we want to hear everyone's voice. We have upcoming shows on deck, our SDSF survey results, SDS dental issues, grief. So please watch on our SDSF Facebook page for show dates. And we're also about to record an after show that won't be live. So look for that link as well.
Thank you again to our guests. Thank you to Orva, our behind the scenes tech wizard. And thank you to Michelle for helping with the comments. And if you're not on the SDS registry, please join today. We're more powerful together. The SDS registry is not the same as Be the Match or the Neutropenia registry. It's for SDS patients. And we're going to share a link on how, link data on how to contact them below.
Thank you, Savannah, for joining us this evening. You did amazing on your first show. And thank you to everyone at home. Stay safe and have a good night.